We all know President Biden's ATF has been ruthless in their enforcement and discrimination against FFLs. That's federal firearms licensed dealers, the people who sell you firearms legally, at least. They've been ruthless as far as taking away their licenses, revoking and suspending that prior administrations maybe didn't quite do that with, and it has perhaps profound implications for FFLs as we move forward. Well, you've heard me talk about it a little bit, but enough about me. I had the opportunity today to sit down with noted expert and owner of FFLexpert.com, Mike Kwiatkowski, who walked me through the top 3 most common ways that FFLs lose their license, as well as what he's seen as far as enforcement changes now versus across almost the last 20 years. Let's get into it. So Mike, thanks for coming in here today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So we're going to get to the big spicy topic of how the enforcement has varied under President Biden versus President Trump, President Obama, President GW, George W. Bush. But why don't you hit me with what's one of the top ways how you're seeing FFLs lose their license today?
The number one way is through the 4473. It really comes down to watching your customers fill out the paperwork, going over the paperwork, and for managers and store owners, doing it right, checking everything. The employee may pass it. That doesn't mean it's right.
So when you say errors with 4473, can you give me a couple common examples? Because you're a consultant for FFLs, you're a consultant for manufacturers. What kind of mistakes are employees or even owners making out there?
The largest one is when I look at the 4473, boxes aren't checked. They have a middle initial instead of a middle name, and there's no note that the person only has a middle initial. Sometimes they just leave the middle name blank. They're supposed to put in NMN, no middle name. If that's the case, that's not in there. Forgetting driver's license numbers, partial driver's license numbers, not stating that this is a driver's license or a state ID. What state is it? Forgetting the NICS information. All things related to sloppy 4473s.
And under the Biden administration ATF, how are you seeing this play out as an enforcement action on FFLs compared to maybe how the same mistakes would have happened in years and administrations past?
Well, when I started, and I'm dating myself a little bit, it was in the early Clinton years. If an I wasn't dotted or a T wasn't crossed, they got upset. You would get yelled at. You would get written up. Just don't do it again. And as we went forward under George W., things were nice and simple. ATF was a lot friendlier because they had to be. For those of you in the NFA world, I remember 5, 7, 30-day max transfer times. Anything that was done, if you saw ATF for a compliance inspection, it was friendly and they were working with you. Obama years, things got rough again. Not quite to that level, but they were right up there. Trump years, ATF was too busy just trying to figure out what he was going to do that day and how to best duck the storm that was coming. Today, you miss one small thing, that can be enough for a revocation meeting or a revocation recommendation. And
revocation meaning license gone. It's not, can you?
Administrative death penalty.
Administrative death penalty. That's definitely a good and strong way of putting it. Just very, very briefly, and for those people who don't know Mike out there, I mean, I've at this point have known Mike for well over 10 years. I mean, I think maybe even 13 years, give or take.
16
years. And you all know me as, of course, being a Second Amendment attorney. I know Mike as the guy who I call when I have questions on ATF regulation issues, enforcement actions, all that kind of stuff. So he is the expert's expert on this, not only for myself, but for folks nationally as well. So he won't toot his own horn. So I have to do it for him that, this is the type of guy that he is, on top of being a fantastic human being. So moving back into the questions. So what rights, if any? Okay, so one of your employees, or maybe you yourself, you forgot to check a box. You've put in an initial for the middle name or whatever else, and now ATF's recommending a revocation. What rights, if any? I mean, can you fight back and win on that?
In theory, and I guess I'd like to back up slightly. Thank you for the praise. I call myself reasonably knowledgeable. But returning to the question, yes, you can have an administrative meeting, and depending on what the problem is, especially if you have an improvement plan and other things, you can work around it. You can stay in business. And after the revocation recommendation, and if you choose to appeal, you're not yet out of business. But it's not a guarantee that you're going to be able to win.
So if folks want us, guys, if you guys down the lens want us to do a longer video where we talk about what that process looks like, let us know in the comment section. But we're trying not to do a 10-hour video right now, so we're going to park it at that. All right, so what's the second most common way that FFLs are getting revoked under the ATF right now?
Bound books. The bound book where the guns are, your acquisition and your disposition are logged, I would say that's probably the second place. Some would even say it's first place. They would put the 4473 second. It all varies. But I would say bound books are number two.
And can you give us an example of like what's a bound book issue that you see out there?
Very commonly, not filling it out completely, not including an acquisition. That is, a gun came into the shop and it's not in the book. Not having the disposition in the bound book. Not having it incorrectly, misidentifying the firearm, which is a lot easier than it sounds. Everybody would think this is simple. You look at a gun, you log it in. There's a lot that goes into that.
When you say identifying, you're not only talking about like make, model, serial number, but you're also talking about handgun, rifle, other, all that kind of stuff.
That can be part of it, but less common. A bigger one is, for example, ATF likes it when you note if it's an imported firearm, who imported it. And you'll get to firearms where the importer information is questionable at best, illegible. And through no fault of anybody, it's just rubbed off, come off, or it's an earlier import where it may have been done with an auto pen by someone in a hurry. And you're trying to get this. Serial numbers, the standards we have today have not been the standards throughout history. Some of those get very interesting. And this goes beyond, is it an I, is it an L, or is it a 1? And it can get far worse than that.
Guys, if you're enjoying seeing Mike come in here, be sure to check out his website and also be sure to check out that like button and let us know in the comment field if you want to see more Mike. I can tell you he's a wealth of information and knowledge that is respected behind the scenes, and I'm hoping to bring that out in front of the curtains as well, nationally in the Second Amendment community. What's the third most common way that you're seeing FFLs get revoked?
Those first two are truly the largest. A distant third is where we start getting into more administrative regulations, doing a gunsmithing operation, or what they think is a gunsmithing operation, but it's a manufacturing operation. An FFL is not allowed to do any sort of work to a firearm, except for cleaning it, without ATF, let me back up, without customer order. If they're doing things like mounting scopes, modifying it, or a really dark one, you're taking a receiver and making it into a full firearm. That's a big problem, and that's technically excise tax evasion. And you'll run into that issue. Employee issues. Unfortunately, sometimes good employees go bad, or some FFLs are just very lazy in doing background checks and reviews on their employees. Guns go missing, things go out the back door. But those are all very distant third place compared to the paperwork.
Yeah, I mean, the paperwork is certainly, in cases that you and I have worked on together, without commenting on specifics and all that kind of stuff, but paperwork is definitely a recurring theme in case Derek's not showing it, we have enthusiastic head nods coming over here from Mike. Definitely by far and away kind of the biggest issue. And, for people who don't know, if you've never been an FFL before, it's not so much, and you correct me if I'm wrong on this, it's not so much that there's so many things, or they're not splitting the atom here, right? It's not like there's so much to know about one particular issue. It's just there's so many different issues. There's such a breadth of knowledge, and you're always encountering new things that as a result, it's kind of like if anybody got audited by the IRS, they're going to find something that, you misclassified. Oh, that's the wrong depreciation table or whatever else. And it almost feels like, and this kind of ties back to the current level of enforcement and the ATF just moving for revocation at the drop of a hat. If the ATF's priority and if their goal is to ensure that FFLs are complying with regulation and law, you would think that they would want to have a working partnership with FFLs so that FFLs can, ask questions. But now it feels like if FFLs ask questions, they're risking losing their business.
Less the asking questions, but it definitely is stopping FFLs from stepping forward and saying, hey, I found a problem. Hey, I found a bad employee. Hey this, hey that. And it's creating, I shouldn't say creating, it is adding to a pre-existing wall of mistrust and distrust between the ATF and the FFLs. If that wall were not there, I truly believe we'd have a lot less violent crime in this country. Because if there were a good working relationship, an FFL could say, hey, this person appears to be doing something involving trafficking. We may have some straw purchases going on here. I'm concerned about this. I'm concerned about that. And really this, I'm not even sure of the right word, and I apologize for using this one, this ridiculous move toward revocation and a strict interpretation of everything, it sounds good in the media, but I think it's actually creating a lot more problems that are a lot deeper than somebody who's lousy at paperwork.
Right. Yeah. So-called. I'm yet to meet a so-called zero tolerance law that doesn't get whatever possible good that it you do in fact achieve doesn't get swallowed whole by all the unintended secondary consequences, such as what you're describing, where FFLs are just paralyzed with fear to go ask questions to try to be proactive, and instead it just results in this walling off. And who knows how long it's going to take for those walls to come down. It will obviously take a profound course change by the ATF, and then years of data points to accumulate that to the point where FFLs start to feel comfortable with, okay, I'm not going to have my head bit off if I go and try to ask them a question or try to be proactive on something.
I completely agree. And unfortunately, the ATF's image issue goes far, far back. And it's gotten to the point where it'll reach this level of being ridiculous. Things will calm down. We'll have an administration change. Without wanting to delve too much into politics, there is a reason that the ATF is better under certain presidents of certain parties and worse under others. And it's just creating this and feeding this distrust. And if that trust were there, I really think that we'd have a lot less violent crime. People talk of gun trafficking. I think that would fall. And I also think there'd be people who would still be alive versus dead had there been a good relationship with ATF, and criminals could have been stopped many steps back on the road.
But why do that when we can just have a zero tolerance law?
It makes for good media, and it ensures that they get proper funding.
How can people find you?
The easiest way to reach me is through FFLexpert.com. You can learn a little about what I do, and I can be contacted through there if there's a serious issue at an FFL. And while this conversation has been revolving around dealers, I do also assist manufacturers and importers.
Well, that's how you get a hold of them. We're going to put that linked not only in the pinned comment, but as well as in the description box below. Guys, if there's anything you want to ask Mike, be sure to post up in the comment field. We'll see if we can bait him to come back in and answer some of your questions that are out there. Mike, thanks for coming in.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Our quote of the day does not have any kind of authorship attribution to it, but it goes something like this. Quote, "In the age of information, ignorance is a choice." Unquote. Thanks for sticking around. Be sure to check out Mike. I'll see you in the comments section and the next video. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content, and we'll see you in the next one.